Right now, somewhere over Siberia, a Boeing 737 is cruising at 35,000 feet. The passengers on board have no idea. The crew has no idea. But somewhere in Dublin, Ireland, there is a man in an office who knows exactly which plane that is. He knows its tail number. He knows its maintenance history. He knows the serial number of every engine bolted to its wings, and he knows it belongs to him. He just can't do anything about it. Over 400 commercial aircraft, roughly $10 billion worth of metal, engines, and avionics. Legally owned by leasing companies in Ireland, Japan, and the United States. Physically flying routes inside Russia. And completely, legally, practically unrecoverable. This is not a story about war. Plenty of people have told that story. This is a story about what happens when the invisible financial system that runs global aviation, the one that makes cheap flights possible, the one built on contracts and trust and a 2001 international treaty, collides with a government that simply decides the rules no longer apply to them, and breaks. To understand how we got here, you need to understand the system that was broken. More than half of all commercial aircraft flying today are not owned by the airlines operating them. They are owned by leasing companies. AerCap, based in Dublin, owns around 1,500 aircraft, more than any airline on Earth. SMBC Aviation Capital, Avolon, Air Lease Corporation, and BOC Aviation are among them. These companies buy planes from Boeing and Airbus, then lease them to airlines around the world for monthly payments ranging from $400,000 to over $1 million per aircraft. Airlines love this. No $100 million asset sitting on their books, no long-term depreciation risk. When the lease ends, they hand the plane back and get a newer one. The whole system runs on one assumption, that when the lease ends or when something goes wrong, you can get the plane back. Before February 2022, nobody seriously questioned that assumption. Before the invasion, Russia was one of the most important markets in global aviation leasing. About 980 commercial aircraft operated inside Russia. Roughly 80% of them were leased from Western companies. Aeroflot, S7 Airlines, Ural Airlines, Rossiya, all of them were flying planes they did not own, paying monthly to lessors whose offices were thousands of miles away. AerCap alone had 135 aircraft and 14 engines leased to Russian carriers. Its net book value was $3.3 billion. SMBC had 34 aircraft. Avolon, Air Lease, and BOC Aviation, 47 lessors in total, had exposure inside Russia. It was a normal, functioning, profitable market, right up until it was not. February 24th, 2022. Russian forces cross into Ukraine. Within 72 hours, the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Canada begin coordinating the most sweeping sanctions package in modern history. Buried inside the European Union sanctions regulation, in language that most people outside the leasing industry never read, was a specific instruction. Western aircraft lessors had until March 28, 2022, exactly 30 days, to terminate all lease agreements with Russian airlines and physically repossess their aircraft. 30 days, to recover hundreds of planes, scattered across the largest country on Earth. The termination notices went out immediately. Legal teams worked around the clock. Lessors contacted airlines, demanded return of aircraft, began coordinating logistics for repossession flights. Some planes were outside Russia at the time, in maintenance facilities in Europe, on layovers in Turkey, on routes to Dubai. Those were recovered quickly. AerCap repossessed 22 aircraft and 3 engines that happened to be outside Russian borders. The rest, the ones on the ground at Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, Vnukovo, and airports across 11 time zones of Russian territory, were a different story entirely. On March 14, 2022, 2 weeks before the Western deadline expired, the Russian government passed a law. It allowed Russian airlines to re-register their leased Western aircraft onto the Russian Civil Aviation Registry. Overnight, Boeing 737s and Airbus A320s that had been registered in Ireland, Bermuda, and the Cayman Islands, standard practice in the leasing industry, were given new Russian tail numbers, new Russian identities. Russia didn't call it nationalization. They never used that word. But that is exactly what it was. 400 aircraft, $10 billion of foreign-owned property absorbed into the Russian fleet by a single piece of domestic legislation. And here is the detail that made it almost impossible to fight. Re-registration didn't change legal ownership. AerCap still owned those planes on paper. Every court in the Western world would agree. But legal ownership and physical possession are two completely different things. To get a plane back, you don't just need a judge to agree with you. You need the airline to cooperate. You need Russian authorities to allow the aircraft to leave. You need access to the airport. You need a crew willing to fly it out. None of those things existed, and none of them were coming. There is a document that was supposed to prevent exactly this. In November 2001, in Cape Town, South Africa, representatives from dozens of countries gathered to sign an international treaty specifically designed to protect aircraft lessors, the Cape Town Convention. It gave lessors internationally recognized rights to repossess their assets in the event of default or breach. It allowed out-of-court enforcement. It was supposed to make aircraft leasing as legally secure as any financial instrument in the world. Over 80 countries signed it. The treaty came into force in 2006. And in September 2011, Russia ratified it, accepted its terms, agreed to be bound by its creditor protection regime. Russia signed it, and then, in March 2022, ignored it completely. Because the Cape Town Convention has no enforcement mechanism, there is no international aviation court with the power to compel a sovereign government. There is no repo team that can fly into Moscow and take planes back. There is no equivalent of a bailiff, a marshal, or a sheriff. The treaty is a piece of paper, and a piece of paper means nothing to a government that has decided it does not. While the legal battles were beginning, something else was happening inside Russia that nobody could stop. Boeing and Airbus immediately suspended all technical support, spare parts supply, and maintenance services to Russian carriers under sanctions. Every authorized service center closed, every parts shipment halted. Overnight, Russian airlines were operating a fleet of hundreds of Western jets with no access to the manufacturer supply chain that kept them airworthy, so they improvised. Aeroflot began grounding some of its Boeing 737s and 747s, not because they were broken, but to use them as parts donors. Engines pulled, avionics removed, landing gear components transferred. By mid-2022, roughly 15% of Aeroflot's fleet had been grounded specifically to cannibalize parts for the aircraft still flying. In 2023, Russia formally legalized the practice. Cannibalization of Western aircraft for spare parts became official government policy. Think about what that means for the planes the lessors were trying to recover. Every day that passed, the $10 billion was being quietly disassembled. An engine here, a component there. Some of those aircraft will never fly again outside Russia, not because they can't be flown out, but because there is nothing left worth flying out. Airbus formally flagged safety concerns about the Russian fleet in late 2022. They were being maintained without manufacturer oversight, with unverified parts, and without proper documentation. The planes were still flying. The question of whether they should be was a different matter entirely. Now let's talk about the money, because the numbers here are staggering. AerCap wrote down $2.7 billion in 2022. A single line item. Gone. SMBC Aviation Capital reported a net loss of $1.1 billion for the year, driven almost entirely by a $1.6 billion impairment on its 34 Russian aircraft. Avolon wrote down $400 million. Air Lease Corporation wrote down $800 million. Across 47 lessors, total industry write-downs exceeded $7 billion. To put that in context, AerCap's total annual revenue in a normal year is around $6 billion. They absorbed nearly half a year of revenue in a single write-down. SMBC's write-down was larger than their entire annual profit in any previous year. And here is the part that made it even more surreal. The planes still existed. They were still flying. Passengers were still boarding them at Sheremetyevo every morning. The aircraft had not crashed. They had not been destroyed. They were just gone, financially, legally, practically. So where do you go when a sovereign government takes $10 billion of your property and there is no court in the world that can enforce your claim against them? You go to your insurance policy. Aircraft lessors carry comprehensive insurance, all risks coverage for physical loss or damage, war risk coverage for conflict scenarios, And the moment the planes became unrecoverable, lessors filed claims. Massive claims. AerCap's insurance claim covered 116 aircraft and 15 standalone engines. The total insured value across the industry ran into the billions. And then the insurers said no. Their argument was precise and, from a certain angle, technically defensible. The planes were not destroyed. They were not damaged beyond repair. They were airworthy. They were flying. Under the strict language of most all-risks policies, a loss requires physical damage or destruction. A government refusing to return your property, while that property continues to function perfectly, was not, in the insurer's reading, a covered loss. Lessors called it absurd. Their property had been confiscated by a nuclear-armed state. They had zero prospect of recovery. If that was not a loss, the word had no meaning. The legal battles launched simultaneously in London, Dublin, New York, and Bermuda. Some of the most complex aviation insurance litigation in history ran in parallel across 4 jurisdictions, involving dozens of law firms, hundreds of millions in legal fees, and questions that the insurance industry had genuinely never had to answer before. Nobody had ever written a policy for this exact scenario. The first resolution came not from a courtroom, but from Moscow. Russia's state insurer, NSK, began approaching lessors with settlement offers. The structure was unusual. NSK would pay the lessor a cash sum. In exchange, legal title to the aircraft would transfer permanently to the Russian airline operating it. The lessor would drop all further claims related to that specific aircraft. In September 2023, AerCap accepted $645 million from NSK, covering 17 aircraft and 5 engines leased to Aeroflot and Rossiya Airlines. In December 2023, another deal followed. $572 million for 47 more aircraft from Ural Airlines and S7. SMBC reached its own settlements. By 2025, their total recovery from Russian insurance and settlements hit $1.4 billion. Read those numbers carefully. AerCap had $3.3 billion of aircraft in Russia. They recovered roughly $1.2 billion through Russian settlements. That is about 36 cents on the dollar, for planes that were still flying, still airworthy, still worth full market value to the airlines operating them. This was not a recovery. It was a forced sale, conducted under duress, dressed in legal language. Russia paid a fraction of the value, kept the planes permanently, and called it settled. The courtroom victory came in June 2025. The English High Court ruled in favor of the lessors. Insurers did owe coverage for the stranded aircraft. The planes were unrecoverable. That constituted a loss under the policy. AerCap was awarded over $1 billion from its own insurance policy, on top of the Russian settlements. It was a landmark ruling, 3 years of litigation, hundreds of millions in legal costs, and the result confirmed something the lessors had known since March 2022. The planes were gone. The court just finally agreed. Smaller lessors without AerCap's legal resources and financial runway had a harder time. Some settled for less, some are still fighting. The legal fees alone consumed a significant portion of what some smaller companies eventually recovered. Here is what Russia did with the planes it kept. The Russian government used money from the National Welfare Fund, the sovereign wealth fund built on decades of oil and gas revenue, to finance the buyout of aircraft for Aeroflot, S7, and Ural Airlines. The same revenue that Western sanctions were designed to restrict was used to permanently acquire $10 billion of Western aviation assets. Today, in 2025, those 3 airlines are still flying those aircraft. Aeroflot A320s, Boeing 737s, planes that were supposed to be in Dublin's leasing portfolio, generating monthly payments for AerCap and SMBC, are instead flying domestic Russian routes between Moscow and Novosibirsk, between St. Petersburg and Vladivostok. The safety picture is deteriorating quietly. Without manufacturer support, without authorized parts, without proper documentation chains, the Russian fleet is aging in ways that are difficult to track from the outside. Aviation safety experts have raised concerns. Russia has no incentive to ground aircraft it spent billions acquiring. The passengers boarding those planes have no way of knowing what maintenance history actually looks like. Here is what this means for everyone else. The Cape Town Convention now has over 90 signatories. It still has no enforcement mechanism. Nothing changed on paper after Russia ignored it. No amendment was passed. No enforcement body was created. The treaty that was supposed to make aircraft leasing as secure as any financial instrument in the world is exactly as toothless today as it was in March 2022. Lessors are repricing risk. Aircraft placed in markets with geopolitical instability now carry higher lease rates, shorter terms, stricter return conditions, and more aggressive insurance requirements. The cost of what Russia did is being quietly absorbed into the global leasing system, and eventually, invisibly, into airline operating costs, and eventually into the price of your ticket. Insurance underwriters are rewriting war risk and political risk policies from scratch. The definitions of loss, confiscation, and unrecoverability are being renegotiated in every major policy renewal. Premiums are rising, coverage is narrowing, the industry is adapting. But adaptation is not the same as being made whole. Aeroflot is flying those planes today. The same aircraft that AerCap financed, maintained, and leased are now permanently part of the Russian fleet. Bought with oil money, maintained with cannibalized parts. Flying routes they were never supposed to fly. The lessors got partial payment. The insurers settled after 3 years of litigation. The planes are not coming back. The most sophisticated asset leasing operation in human history, the invisible system that owns more aircraft than any airline on Earth, that makes cheap flights possible, that runs out of a small city in Ireland, was built on one assumption that nobody ever seriously tested: that the rule of law was universal. It isn't. And somewhere over Siberia right now, at 35,000 feet, a Boeing 737 is proving it.